Hi, this is Dr. Latasha McElwain. I am doing a presentation today on understanding and preventing child abuse and neglect. This presentation is for supervision purposes for many of the agencies that I'm a clinical director for, working with children and understanding what's going on with child abuse, the prevention of it, and the issues surrounding the neglect and what goes on that we need to be able to make a report, a DSS report. Of course, I've spoken about all of us being mandated reporters in this field, as well as just understanding what's going on with our adolescents and what could be causing some of the things that are going on in their lives. So we talk a lot about children and adolescents in these supervision sessions that I do. And like I said, we tap on child abuse and neglect. We tap on other things as well, but this is the main focus right now is child abuse and neglect. So moving right along, our introduction, basically the Child Abuse and Neglect Treatment Act defines child abuse and neglect as or child maltreatment as basically failure to act on the part of the parents or the caretaker, which could result in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse or exploitation, as well as an act or failure to act with when you understand that there is imminent danger, imminent risk in place for a child, and it could cause them serious harm. Another thing is that neglect is the failure to meet the child's basic needs, as in providing food, shelter, basic supervision, the necessary medical and mental health treatment needed, adequate education, or emotional comfort. So a lot of times in the current avenues of work that I do. Medical neglect is one of the things that we typically look like medical, not only medical neglect, but also mental health treatment. If it is not being sought after or the child is not involved in that type of treatment, then that's also a report that we definitely can make to make sure that parents are aware that they need to be following up, not just with food, shelter, and basic supervision. They need to also be following up with making sure the child has the necessary medical care, mental health care, and things of that nature, as well as adequate education and, again, emotional support. Physical abuse refers to injury of a child, basically striking a child, kicking a child, beating a child, biting a child. For the most part, anything that can lead to physical injury. There's a lot of reporting when a child says, "My mom struck me," or "My mom kicked me, my dad beat me, or my dad bit me," or something like that. Any of those things, especially when they tell us, I don't know if people realize this or not, but when there's a spank with closed fists or whatever, or a situation where closed fists came into play, we do try to, make sure that we ask those questions so that we can figure out, what's going on and what we need to be reporting. Sexual abuse, basically, if a child is persuaded, forced to, or sex is used as something, basically engaging in sexual act. Of course, we know children are not supposed to be engaging in sexual act. So that is something that we try to make sure that if we hear it, we're able to report it and we get information regarding it, and then allow typically in our situation, allow DSS to be the investigator to find out what's really going on and how we can intervene as we need to. Next one is thinking about what factors lead to the risk. So basically, when it comes down to abuse and neglect, families from all walks of life deal with a lot of, abuse and neglect, as well as different incomes, religion, and ethnicities. Doesn't really matter. I always tell people the same thing with, with a lot of things, mental health, physical health, abuse, neglect. Doesn't matter what walk of life the family is. What is being done could possibly be again, abuse or neglect. When we're looking at the maltreatment of children, we have to make sure that we are, getting the full story and making sure that we are helping people to understand that, there are many forces that are working together out here to help impact family, which will, help us to understand what goes on and understand how we can be of assistance. Another factor that we have is parent or caregiver risk factors, where sometimes we have parents that are stressed out and have different things going on and have a lot. They're trying to make sure they feed everyone, take care of everyone. That could be a concern as well. And then we look at the fact that we have experienced or witnessed violence as a child, or teachers of violent behaviors or justify it as appropriate. So sometimes I always tell people, like, when you know better, you do better. If a child witnessed it or figured that that was something that was correct to do and didn't have any outside influences that is not correct, then they'll think that's something they're supposed to, experience or witness or be involved in for the most part. So when we're talking about substance abuse, that pretty much interferes with the mental functioning, poor judgment, self-control, ability to protect one's child, or making the child needs a priority. So that happens from time to time too. That's another factor to think about. And then also the lack of knowledge of normal child development and unrealistic expectations, frustration, and appropriate methods of discipline. So this could cause some concerns. I always tell people, no, a child's not going to be reading at age 1.5. No, they're supposed to be reading at a certain developmental age, and it's not 1.5. So, just having realistic expectations versus those unrealistic expectations. Just because they talked early don't mean they're reading at 1.5. I'm just giving that as an example. That actually sounds very, again, unrealistic expectations. Moving right along here, talking about family risk factors, children living in single parent homes, dealing with poverty, and definitely having few social supports. This may contribute to the stress and increase a level of maltreatment. Children in violent homes that witness intimate partner violence, which is domestic violence, and they may experience it. They may be the victims. They may be they may be victims of physical abuse themselves, and they may also be neglected by the parents that are caregiving, who are focused on their partner, or the unresponsiveness to be unresponsive to their children due to their own fears. So I always tell people, you think about a mom or a dad is in a situation where it's intimate partner violence going on. Mom could be so in fear for her life that she's unresponsive to the kids, or she's, neglecting the kids and don't even realize it, because she's so fearful that he's going to hurt the kids or he's going to hurt her even more. So there are a lot of things there to consider. Stressful life events. Parenting is, of course, stressful, and it has some emotional stress to go with it. Parenting stress, emotional stress. If a parent loses a job, if a parent have things going on, physical illnesses, marital problems, death of a family member, things can become a little bit worse, and it could become hostile. Anxiety could be involved, as well as depression. Also, the amount of and the increase in family conflict, then there could be a lot of maltreatment going on when it comes to, the stresses of life for parents sometimes, and it's, brought upon their children. Other parts talking about maltreatment, parents and caregivers are less supportive, they're less affectionate, they are less playful, and they're definitely dealing, their responsiveness to the children is, very little for the most part. Or it could also be on the other end of it. It could be harsh discipline. It could be verbal aggression, less, no positive support. So sometimes we do think about parents using timeout, reasoning, and then recognizing and encouraging the child's success. So those are things that we have to consider that may not be happening with families when they're risk factors for families. The next one you think about is the risk factors for children. So child risk factors are basically infants and young children because they can't defend themselves. They're so small, they need constant care. They're the ones that definitely could deal with maltreatment and basically being shaped by a parent, caregivers being frustrated, overwhelmed by the persistent crying because something is wrong with the child. Teenagers, on the other hand, are at greater risk for sexual abuse. When we look at children with physical and cognitive and emotional disabilities or chronic illness, they may be at greater risk for maltreatment also. When we're looking at parents and caregivers of children with disabilities, they're more likely to experience high levels of stress, depression, and anger. So children with disabilities may not understand that abusive behaviors are inappropriate and are unable to defend themselves. Aggression, when we're looking at aggression, we're talking about the attention deficit. We're talking about difficult tantrums, basically having children tantruming and having real difficult tantrums, can't calm them down, behavior problems that children have. All these are associated with increased risk for maltreatment. So sometimes the parents have poor coping skills. They're unable to just empathize with the child that's and also they have a hard time and difficulty with controlling emotions. So maltreatment is often exasperated with some of the problems that are going on and some of the concerns. So physical abuse may develop aggression behaviors that might lead to recurrent maltreatment. So we do try to look out for that as well. Next one, we look at some of the environmental risk factors. And the environmental risk factors, we definitely look at the vast majority of parents and caregivers who live in these types of environments that are not abusive. So we do realize that, but however, there's stress and it can be increased with some of the issues and concerns here that will, put them at risk for abuse. Some might be poverty, underemployment, also looking at the family's level of stress, depression, substance use, social isolation. We're looking at parents having less material and emotional support in order to be able to support the child, in order to provide a positive parenting role. So for the most part, there are concerns that happen there. The understanding or being able to look at the parenting role, the pressures of, conforming to conventional standards of parenting and things of that nature. So when we're looking at children living in dangerous neighborhoods, high risk for children, and they're in higher risk than children that are living in more safer neighborhoods for the most part. So sometimes severe neglect can occur. Physical abuse, we're looking at sexual abuse, we're looking at violence that definitely may seem appropriate because that's where they live, but it's actually not appropriate. But they witness different things more frequently in not so safe or dangerous neighborhoods. So those are environmental factors to think of. We think about the consequences of child maltreatment. We also look at the fact that child abuse and neglect can result in physical and psychological developmental delays. It could cause, a lot of things to go in a different direction than we expect. So a neglectful mother may not feed her baby properly. This could slow down the development of the brain. This also can cause some emotional issues when it comes down to the emotional abuse. If there's an emotional abusive father in the situation, could cause some damage with the child's ability to form trust in relationships. Abuse and neglect, a lot of times our children can see the world as unstable. They can also be frightened by the world, in dangerous, be involved in dangerous places. They can also, have a very low self-worth. Their ability to cope they have some concerns there, adapting to different environments as they grow up. So a lot of times if maltreatment goes unaddressed, then it contributes to problems in life later, such as some of the ones that we've seen is alcohol, substance use, and substance abuse, depression, domestic violence, multiple partners, multiple sexual partners, exposure to STDs, and then suicidal thoughts and attempts. So these are some of the things that come along with understanding the consequences of what happens with child maltreatment or child abuse situations. Again, the impact of the abuse can vary on different things. It could vary on the age. It could vary on the developmental status of a child. It could be, when the abuse or neglect actually occurred. It's the types of abuse that we typically are looking for is physical neglect or sexual abuse, and there are more than that as well. There is emotional abuse out there as well. They're seeing domestic abuse and things of that nature. So the frequency and the duration and the severity of the abuse also causes concerns moving forward, as well as the relationship between the victim and his or her abuser. So those are concerns to think about when we're talking about the consequences. Some factors to protect children from risk of abuse and neglect. This is just basically the child's optimism, high self-esteem, intelligence, creativity, humor, and independence. This can enhance the child with more coping skills to face the adversity that's coming through in their life, as well as acceptance of peers and positive influences such as teachers, mentors, and role models. Also having family access to social supports, neighborhood stability, and access to safe schools and adequate health care. Another thing to think about, child's experience of love, acceptance, positive guidance, as well as protecting from the adult caregivers, making sure that they feel trusted and they feel that they are able to, thrive and talk with their caregivers and things of that nature, that they feel, I would say comfortable and secure, or definitely confident and secure. Another thing to think about when we talk about factors in protecting child from the risk of abuse or neglect is that the parents and the caregivers have respectful communication. They listen. They're definitely having consistent rules and expectations, and have safe opportunities to promote independence. A lot of times we don't think of those things, but those things are very important. Also, the parent or caregiver is able to cope with stress in everyday life in their own lives so that they'll be able to support their young ones. Also having the inner strength to bounce back when things are not going so well. Also, where parents can connect with in social networks for emotional support, family and friends and neighbors, as well as families looking to make sure that they can take care of their own basic needs with food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and things of that nature. Those are essential parts of making sure that you can be able to take care of children, but also making sure that they have access to childcare, you have access to healthcare, you have access to mental health services. All right. And then the types of prevention that we're looking at when it comes down to child maltreatment is, so of course, in this presentation, we're talking about psychologists definitely being involved in the developmental and implementation of prevention, also having primary prevention programs that definitely bring awareness to the public and service providers, policymakers about the issues with child maltreatment or child abuse. Secondary, there are some programs targeted the population in one or more risk factors for child maltreatment. So a lot of times you have providers, you have services, you have counselors, you have social workers and things of that nature that can definitely work with families and try to help with that prevention, or if you feel like something's happening and going on. The other things to think about is making sure that you do understand that if you suspect there's child abuse, you suspect there's neglect, that you are making contact. So I gave out some resources earlier about different counties in North Carolina, DSS services, to be able to make contact with them in order to fully consider and make it aware that there's a concern. So every county has their own DSS that we make contact with. But in this presentation, there are also some resources here. The Child Welfare Information Gateway, Child Help USA, American Professional Society of Abuse of Children. So there are different programs here that's definitely helpful to be able to make contact with or to understand more about child abuse and child malnutrition. Maltreatment. So the sources here, we got this information pretty much from the APA resolution of psychological issues related to children. These are some resources that are available. APA also has protecting our children from abuse and neglect. So there are different resources that you can definitely tap on and take a look at for the most part. So with this presentation, we also have some books that can be followed up on as well. And we got all of this information from basically an overview of child abuse and child neglect, understanding it and the preventions of it from the APA website, just to be able to give a good, healthy amount of information that will help us understand some of the things that we could come across working in this population with adolescents and children, and to be able to kind of decipher and figure out, okay, this might need to be, or not might need to be, this will need to be reported. Or if you say might, yes, staff it with your team to see if it's information that needs to be reported, and you need to be able to make those reports adequately with the local authorities, DSS, and if it gets to the point of the police department. But once it gets to different things like that, it goes more into the DSS worker doing what they have to do, and you may have to give a statement or whatever the case may be. But other than that, this is how we're going to consider some of the information so that we can try to keep our children safe and make sure that if we notice harm or feel like there's harm, feel like there's abuse, feel like there's neglect or anything like that, that we are reporting that information. Thanks again. This is Dr. Latasha McElwain doing a presentation on an overview of understanding child abuse and child neglect. Thank you.